All right, Coach, we are live.
I'm
Welcome to
alive. Thank you. I'm glad I'm alive.
welcome to the School of Fish. It's an honor and a privilege to have you for this, allotted amount of time. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure, John.
For those that don't know you, maybe you could just give a little bit. I'll actually kick off a little bit of the background, and then if you don't mind, maybe elaborating on some of the journey that you've been on, if that works.
It works for me.
So, Coach Jack Kaminer and I know each other when I played basketball in high school in Scarsdale, which started over 25 years ago. I think we're now celebrating 25 years since, in a way, we walked off the court together in what was my last high school basketball game, and I believe your last year as a high school basketball coach.
Correct.
And since then, which is 25 years later, you've really kind of built this version two or three of an amazing career. But maybe for the audience, give a sense on your upbringing, where you're from, and maybe just a little bit about your coaching history. And then we'll dive into basketball and other stuff, if that's okay.
Boy, you left the door wide open for me. I grew up in Brooklyn in a lower income project. And I played high school basketball at Eastern District High School in Brooklyn. That's where Red Auerbach, the famous Boston Celtic coach, attended. Barry Manilow, the performer, attended Eastern District High School. He was a year or two behind me. And I received a basketball scholarship to Long Island University. I think the new coach, when he came in a year later, was surprised how anybody could give me a basketball scholarship, but provided an education for me at LIU. And a year out of Long Island University in downtown Brooklyn, I got the head coaching job at Wingate High School. And when I was named the coach, I was 22 years of age at the time. And I coached my first game at 23. I spent 5 years at Wingate High School, then 4 years at CCNY, City College of New York. Then I went to Truman High School, where I coached for 3 years, and then to Scarsdale High School, which was culture shock for me, by the way, leaving New York City to this upper middle class affluent community, and spent 20 years there, and just felt very, very good about that. When I finished at Scarsdale, I started to stay in the loop and being with young people. I started giving presentations at colleges with athletic teams, and worked with some of the top coaches in the country. And then, as you know, John, I started with former Scarsdale players. One in particular, Andrew Wallach, who really helped me initiate this with an organization called Focus for a Future, which is a non-for-profit helping underserved children go to for-profit camps. So that's a quick summary of my life, with the exception of my wonderful family and my special bride of it'll be 53 years in June,
Amazing.
Paula. So
Who
yes.
is now also your chief technology officer,
Oh,
and was able to help coordinate the technology side of this interview. So thank you, Paula.
exactly, exactly,
So
exactly.
Coach, let me, because I think there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So I don't want to put a time limit. I think this could go longer than expected, but I've never heard you talk about your childhood. Yes, but how did your family either settle or have its roots in Brooklyn? What is the origin of that, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't. That's an interesting question because it brings up something I've discussed with friends. Um, I've gotten to know a lot about former players' lives. their childhood, what's happened with them in their careers. And yet, the vast majority of these individuals, all of whom are now adults, know very little about my background. And that's why I find this question quite fascinating, because I've discussed this with some adults. My parents are both immigrants from Russia, as my father would say, Russia, Poland, because Poland kept changing, Germany, Russia, uh, you know. So they're both immigrants and they settled in Brooklyn. And because of financial reasons, they provided an apartment for my brother and myself in a lower income project. And, unless you're exposed to things, you don't know what you're missing. And my childhood in Brooklyn, in the Williamsburg projects, was wonderful because there were hundreds of kids to play stickball with, baseball with, basketball with. So it was a wonderful childhood. And those of us in Brooklyn would go to Brighton Beach and Coney Island, and you go to Manhattan, just like the Bronx kids would go to Manhattan and stay in the Bronx. Very rarely did we think of going to Queens or that foreign country, Staten Island. There was no bridge then. So we really stayed in those two boroughs, and it was a very, very interesting time and an enjoyable time. It's only in high school that I started to be exposed to more affluent communities when we played high school basketball against other high schools. And I started going to Manhattan Beach, where there was great basketball during the nicer weather, and played against some great players there, and many of them who became NBA players and well-known coaches. And so that was a little bit about my background.
Got it. And did you, at an early age, obviously you had a love, I'm sure, for sports and basketball in particular, but did you, in high school or college, ever envision yourself becoming an educator and a coach? When did that kind of passion or come to realization?
Yes, thank you. That is a good point. My first love was baseball. I loved the Brooklyn Dodgers. And there was a time period, and some of the people my age will remember this if they're watching this. To go to Ebbets Field, if you collected 20 wrappers, I think it was Borden's ice cream. If you collected 20 wrappers and sent it into Dodger management, they would send you a free ticket. So growing up relatively poor, we would stand around while people were eating ice cream with the hope that they're getting rid of the wrapper. Or it was a Dixie cup cover of Borden's ice cream. So they would take the cover off and you'd ask, can I have the cover? So people in Brooklyn, adults, started to realize that young people, kids like me, would collect these wrappers, and they would just give you the wrapper. And we would go to baseball games. Now, in junior high, I had two physical education teachers, and I remember the names, Mr. Dowd and Mr. Cochran, and they would play ball with us. And I said, what a great job. This is
Right.
they get paid for this.
Right.
And I had the good fortune of actually being recruited to Eastern District High School. I was going to go to the great boys high school where there were great, great players, where I probably wouldn't have played much even if I made the team. But I went to Eastern District because I met a wonderful young coach by the name of Herb Bernstein. And he changed my life in many ways. Not only was he a great role model and a wonderful basketball player himself, but in my junior and senior year, the end of my sophomore year and junior year, he actually took me up to the Catskill Mountains to a major resort called Tamarack Lodge. And I was exposed to another way of life. And exposure really opens your eyes to many things. and is often a great motivation to want to do other things. And to this day, I was at Herb Bernstein's 90th birthday with Paula, my wonderful wife, and we're in touch, and we see him on a regular basis when we're in New York City. So with Mr. Dowd and Mr. Cochran and Mr. Bernstein, Coach Bernstein, I knew I wanted to be a physical educator and a coach at a very early in life.
Right. And you said that your first coaching job at Wingate High School, funny enough, which we've talked about, is also where my father graduated from a few years earlier. Was it like unforeseen for a 22-year-old or 23-year-old to land a head coaching job? Was that unprecedented at the time, or that
Uh,
was it
I,
hard for them
I
to find?
know my understanding was I was the youngest coach in New York City, and that normally individuals didn't get a head coaching job uh, at 22, 23, 24. Yes. So that was, from my understanding, unique.
Got it. And then when you stepped on the court for that first practice or that first tryout, whatever, however it was going, what was that? If you recall, what was that experience like? Any
Well,
memories from day one of your coaching career?
I remember uh, what I do recall, and John, I'm not going to answer
Yeah,
that part of the
yeah.
question directly, but I remember the first.
Year one is acceptable.
Yeah, it's when I first met the young men before I started coaching them. So when I knew I had the job, I called for a meeting and went over to Wingate High School. And I remember it was in the balcony of the gymnasium, and I met these young people, and I felt very comfortable because in my neighborhood I was playing basketball in Williamsburg. Even as a young adult and college player, I was playing with high school kids. So uh, the familiarity of being with 16 and 17-year-old young people who played basketball was commonplace for me. So it was a wonderful meeting, and we had some laughs, and that was the beginning of a long history with these individuals. And just a quick tidbit, in 2016, we actually had our 50th anniversary with these guys. 8 individuals with their wives came to Barclays Center in Brooklyn prior to a net game, and we just had a wonderful time together. And frankly, I've been in touch with the vast majority of these kids throughout my adult life. So it's been special.
No, and obviously it sounds like there was a nice run of between Wingate and Truman and City College. But how did the head coaching job at Scarsdale come to be? Was that something that you were seeking, or that someone had heard about what you were doing in New York City and recruited you to be the head coach at Scarsdale?
You're interesting. You're asking some very interesting questions, John. You're doing a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you, Coach.
What happened was in the 70s, that time period around 75, 76, 77, New York City was going through a fiscal crisis. There were real financial difficulties in New York City, and it manifested itself in education for sure, and things that were expected of teachers. Instead of teaching a 5-period day, we were sometimes teaching a 6-period day. They put all kinds of pressures on you. And I made up my mind that under these conditions, if I can make a positive change, I will. I enjoyed teaching and coaching in New York City. That was my comfort zone. So I spoke to a number of people I knew through basketball. I thought that might be the hook that could help get me into a Westchester High School, because we were living in White Plains. And a friend of mine, who people who are familiar with basketball would know, Ronnie Rothstein. Ronnie Rothstein at the time was the coach of Eastchester High School. He eventually became the first head coach of the Miami Heat, worked with Pat Riley, and eventually became the head coach with the Detroit Pistons. Well, Ronnie told me there was a job opening for a basketball coach at Scarsdale High School. And that led me having an interview with Bill Siowitz, who was the athletic director. And unlike my first job at Wingate High School, I came with a fairly solid background, having coached in New York City, and I was given the job, but not teaching there. I was just coaching there.
Got
So
it.
the first 2 years of coaching at Scarsdale, I was still teaching at Truman High School.
Understood. And then when you talk about, I saw your coaching, call it philosophy or style, in the later years at Scarsdale, maybe in the 90s or late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. Did you, moving from a New York City school, which my guess would be slightly more up tempo than maybe what you were prepared to roll out at Scarsdale, how did you bring a style to Scarsdale that you developed at Wingate and Truman? Or did you say, listen, this is kind of the type of players that I have in Scarsdale, and I don't know what they were at the time, and develop, modify the style of play to match the players that you were coaching?
Yeah. Well, my coaching style was predicated upon the capabilities of my own players, my own student athletes, and the competition we had to play against. So at Wingate High School, we had some wonderful athletes who could really get out and go. They could run the court. And I said, hey, this is something I'm going to stay with. And, we had real, significant success at Wingate, culminating in a New York City championship, my final year there in 69-70. We had two undefeated teams in New York City, Clinton High School from the Bronx, with the Tom Henderson, a former future NBA player, was in the backcourt, and we had quite talented kids as well playing against them for this New York City championship. And we loved to press, we loved to run, because we were capable of doing it. And when I made the transition to City College in particular, we were now playing against scholarship schools, Division II scholarship schools, and my personnel changed. And I had to become more creative in terms of our offense, which I did. So we were no longer that same running, pressing team. At Scarsdale, you looked at a lot of the teams we played against, they loved to run. They loved to press. For those familiar with Westchester basketball, Mount Vernon in particular, White Plains, New Rochelle High School. So we adjusted our style to our own players and, of course, to our competition. And one thing I always try to do is set the tempo, to do things when we play against our opposition, to do things they did not like to do. So a style that would put them in an uncomfortable zone. So that was my attempt.
Got
So,
it.
yeah.
And then in those 20 years, obviously you had, a variety of types of teams and players and memories. But talk to me a little bit about some of like the best memories from your 20-year run in Scarsdale. Either, a highlight or two, kind of just some learning lessons from that experience.
Well, there are two phases. My answer would be there are two phases in terms of that question. One is, of course, the basketball aspect and some of the positive things that occurred. The second phase, which is much more important to me, was the relationships that were developed during this time period. And once again, as you know, many of these former players have become friends. They're involved in our organization. They've been in touch. We had 2 visits from 2 former Scarsdale basketball players with their wives this winter here in Florida. So, there were 2 different aspects to it. The basketball part, of course, when you have success, it makes the season more enjoyable because the kids are happier. No ifs or buts about it. There were parts of basketball that I didn't like to do. I never liked finalizing my teams. The hardest thing I had to do as a coach was to tell a youngster who was in the final cuts that you didn't make the team. That was never easy. So
And then in terms of when you did, when you had players, let's just say that may have started early on in, freshman, sophomore, junior year as maybe not as capable or competent, and then really you worked with them to make them a better person, a better player. I'm sure as a coach that gives you also as much satisfaction, right? As opposed to just winning the game.
Well, you always like to see the growth of a player. There's
Yeah.
no question about that.
Yeah. And and when you talk about growth of even a player versus growth of a team, did you have any like memorable seasons where maybe the expectation that you had prior to the season at the onset to where you finished was like a night and day type of change?
Well, other than my first couple of years at Scarsdale, where we had really the best player I ever coached, ever, anywhere, was John Ravelli from Scarsdale High School. When I came in and realized this young man was a sophomore, 10th grader, I mean, frankly, I was quite surprised at his talent, his basketball IQ, his work ethic. And John Ravelli, for the next 3 years, made us all look good, made the players on the team look good, made me look good. He was a wonderful, wonderful player and had a wonderful career at Stanford University, where he became a star, frankly. So, other than that, those years where the expectations were high by a lot of people, I think from what I've been told, the success we had in other seasons was a surprise to many. Winning the Section 1 championship in 1988, 1992, beating Mount Vernon with those teams. I think it was 8 or 9 times we beat Mount Vernon. Twice, we were the only team ever to beat them 3 times in a season. And for some reason, I think there was a player by the name of Jonathan Fishman on that team.
Yeah, the good luck charm. The good luck charm.
Yeah.
Was it 1990? What was the score at halftime against Mount Vernon in 1992? What was you're speaking about coaching philosophy and making people feel, let's say, a little uncomfortable or more in your zone than theirs. What was your strategy for that game? I think it's a good question.
First, to your audience,
for those that know.
Yeah. I'll give you the score first. It was 2-0 at the end of the first quarter. Okay. Mount Vernon refused to come out and guard us. Okay. It was 10-9 at the end of the half. We were losing by 1. But as I said in my halftime talk, we have them right where we want them. And I firmly believe that. Our going out for that game at the county center in the postseason, we had beaten them twice already. And they had pressed us. We ran through the press. They played tough man-to-man, as they always do, Mount Vernon. they've had a great program there and great consistency in the success they had. So we were expecting them to have some sort of trap against us. And, we would attack the trap. But when they collapsed into a zone and allowed us to just hold the ball for a half, uh, for the most part, I thought it would work to our advantage because we would stay out of foul trouble. The court at the county center was longer, so we would be well rested. And as I said at halftime, we have them right where we want them. And
Yeah.
that's how I felt.
And you won the game, right? Is
30,
that correct?
32-17.
Right. And some
Remember,
give
there was no clock.
right. So some people say that that game was the one of the starting points to installing a shot clock in
That's correct.
Westchester High School
I, I,
basketball.
I have I have heard the same rumors.
You were credited with that. Yeah, it's even when I was younger than high school years and coming from a family that loved basketball and just going to watch the town that I was in compete at that level was always aspirational. And I give you a lot of credit for kind of being the glue and the foundation to kind of compete with teams that often instances were clearly more athletic, maybe more capable on the surface, but you really put great teams on the court. And for those that played with you or know of what you've done, I think everyone appreciates that history.
Well, I hope so. I hope
So,
so. It was a lot of fun. That is for sure.
and obviously, we're conducting this interview kind of at the tail end of the final eight, going into Final Four weekend. This was kind of the send off year for Coach Krzyzewski at Duke, which has, I think, gone according to plan so far. Hopefully, he'll keep winning and moving on and maybe raise the national championship, which would be a amazing ending to play North Carolina in the Final Four and then win a national championship. But when you look at the way he went about his final year in coaching versus yours, which, being on your team in the last year, we had no idea. What did you deliberate or uh, what was the realization you came to know that this was going to be your final year as a head coach?
Well, Coach Krzyzewski, who, in my opinion, has run the most successful basketball program in the United States for men over the last 40 years, he made his announcement during the season. I went into the season not thinking this will be my final year. I wasn't sure what I would do the following season, but that was the case the last couple of years because I started to really feel the fatigue as the season progressed. Not just my last year, but the previous couple of years as well. And what I found is that when I had a break and had the summer, away from Scarsdale basketball, I rejuvenated myself, and I came back in September ready to go. Well, in this case, following the summer and the fact that we had a very successful year, as you know, John, as a starter on that team, we lost in the finals of the Section 1 championship. That same enthusiasm wasn't there. And I finally said, maybe this is the time to leave. And so that was a major difference between Krzyzewski, Coach K, and Coach K. The other thing is, for some reason, I think he's gotten a little more notoriety than
Look,
I received in my
you could
final
have held
year.
your own. I actually, as a surprise clip, I recently was able to play some of I think we videotaped all of our senior year games, and I took my phone and I put it on the computer. So I don't think, have you seen a video of what we'll call the final game of your career or no?
I I may have, or
Years ago.
maybe after losing that game where I made my fair share of mistakes as I evaluated each game, uh, uh, I just kind of put it behind me. But I don't remember. It's
Yeah.
1997. That's 25 years
So
ago.
celebrating 25 years, here is a brief clip starting with the introductions. We won't go into the game because that may be too painful, but I'm going to put, hang on one second. Let me see if this works here. Hold on.
Shoot.
Here you see the starting lineups for the Raiders. Rob Kotak at center, John Fishman forward, Wes Clayton is the point guard.
There's Wes Clayton.
Sure.
And here's
There.
the man, Scott Wallet. 24 points against Mount Vernon.
So this is the finals of the Section 1 championship.
The man they call Steve Kerr.
And there you are in the huddle with a little bit more hair.
That was my comb over.
Yes. Yeah. So I thought that would be I'll take that off. Yeah. At some point, I'm going to make copies for everybody 25 years later to celebrate. So
that's an interesting team.
Yeah, I always say to you, if you knew it was going to be your last year, you could have given that speech at halftime to say, if win it for the coach, so to say, right? If you had known, jokingly. But no, so obviously, Scarsdale and coaching was an amazing experience. I'm sure set the foundation for a lot of what you're doing today in both business, life, with your family. But talk a little bit about the launch and development of Focus for a Future, because what I heard you say before, your coaches that took you to the Catskills, right? Obviously was an eye-opening experience for you as a city kid that hadn't been exposed to that, an outside of city environment. Do you feel like that experience for yourself and the time you spent summers at Camp Lennox in Massachusetts, was that really like kind of your true calling to go out and create a foundation or a nonprofit around providing that opportunity to kids that in essence were similar to you in their upbringing?
Well, it's not as though when I was retiring, I was thinking of starting a non-for-profit. I knew very little about non-for-profits. But remember, my final 3 years as a teacher, I did not coach at Scarsdale High School. I gave up coaching in 97. I retired as a teacher in 2020. But what I started to do is give presentations, as I said earlier, at different colleges. So, for example, I worked with Jay Wright, the Villanova coach. I worked with him twice at Hofstra when he was first starting off, and then once at Villanova. I worked with John Beeline. Before he went to Michigan, he was a very successful coach at West Virginia. I worked with Steve Lavin at UCLA. So wherever we wanted to travel, I tried to do these workshops. And I did many, many such workshops with college teams, which kept me involved with young people and a sport I loved. And then at some point, I said, I'd really like to get back to working with younger kids. And I was always involved with camps. Again, this is where a lot of my young people like you don't realize this. But one year, I actually was a dishwasher at a camp. I think it was the end of my freshman year or something. I'm not sure, but I washed dishes. Then I was a counselor during college. Then I ran a camp waterfront, following my college years. I was a girls' camp director. And then finally a specialist in the area of basketball. So I knew things about camps, and I brought my captain of that city championship team, 1970, to Camp Algonquin with me to work on the staff. And I realized that Philip Lawkins, who had a successful career and lives in Minnesota, and we do Zooming together with a lot of the other guys, Philip was the only Black individual, I was going to say young person, individual at Camp Algonquin in 1970. And they love Philip, which didn't surprise me. Didn't surprise me because of his personality. And jumping ahead to the workshops I was doing, I said, you know what? Because I'm involved in camp, why can't I get some of these kids into camp? Like Philip went his senior year in high school, but start him younger. And I spoke to one of my former players who preceded you at Scarsdale High School, Andrew Waller. And he said, sure, we can assist you. We'll start you off, but we have to start as a non-for-profit. So Andrew and I spoke, and I discussed it with the boss of my family, Paula, and we started the non-for-profit. And I'll never forget, Camp Lennox said, yes, we have a couple of beds for you. And I think that was either 2003 or 2004. We started in 2003, but I think it was 2004 where we placed the first children. That was followed the next year by Brant Lake Camp and Pontiac, Camp Pontiac. And segue 15 years, and in 2019, we had placed 526 underserved children into for-profit camps. And at one point, there was always 120 camps that we worked with. And Paula and I never select the child. We have a criteria for this, where the educators have to look at the child being personable, real good kids who make a good effort in the classroom and whose parents earn under $60,000 a year. And most of our kids get free lunch or free breakfast because it's significantly below the $60,000 figure that we give. And that's how we got involved with Focus for a Future. On our board are members of our former Scarsdale basketball teams and some parents, like your dad, as a parent of Scarsdale players, is a member of our board. And we've had the good fortune of being honored by the American Camp Association. We were honored by Scope and their organization that helps out with children. And we feel very fortunate, and it's been very gratifying. And there are certain things you cannot put a dollar value on. Can't put a dollar value on it. And that's relationships that have developed over the years, such as with you and so many other former student athletes who played for me. And of course, the work we're doing now with children and, visiting camps, seeing the kids. Yes.
And with the students, now 15, 18 years later, right? Have you, what's not even what's a great story, because they're all probably, but what do you feel like is the common theme that you see when these kids experience summer camp? What do you think the common takeaways that either the children or their families kind of realize as kind of a mini life-changing experience?
Wonderful question. Our feedback comes from the educators who place the children. Remember, they know the children. They see the kids coming back to their elementary school, their middle school, etc. So it comes from them, and it comes from the camp directors. And the reason we've been successful is because our volunteer teachers who select these children, and currently we're working with over 30 volunteer teachers who do this sort of work. They are the ones who give us the feedback, and they have seen changes in these children. That is for sure. The camp owners, and this is what surprised me a little bit. I knew children, if they're great kids, would fit in with other children, no matter what their race or religion might be. Sometimes there are curveballs thrown. Okay, that happens. But overall, the camp directors have talked about how our children in our program have impacted the paying campers in such a positive way. And what do we hear? That a lot of these kids who come from upper middle class families want to know if so-and-so will be in our bunk next year. We want to be in the bunk with him. We've had children who have gone from New Rochelle, for example. The boy went to so many bar mitzvahs that he was told he's supposed to bring a gift.
Right.
So there have been some great stories. We've had a parent who said, we're bringing a car up to Westchester to bring a kid back for a birthday party. And Barry Johnson, one of our first kids, was thrown out to California. He was with the same group over a 6-7 year period. So there are some great stories of kids who have been successful.
And obviously the growth and success, speaks for itself. I think now, are you almost up to, I heard you say 526, I think, right? But what is the kind of running total to date on how many kids roughly? Is it over 7? Because that was, you said, in 2019, 500. Okay. So if you've had a few hundred more since then, or am I miscalculating?
Let me say this.
Yeah.
When a child attends camp, we often follow what the camp directors or camp owners want, what they desire. So they ask for a 3rd grade boy going into 4th grade. We want an athletic kid. So we follow that. The other thing that they want is not a new kid each year. If the kid has been successful, they would like to see this young person continue. So we've had numerous young people who have continued at the camp and have become counselors. And then they, of course, gone to college. We had one young man out of White Plains. It's a great story. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was in a group home. He is now a college graduate who went to Racket Lake Camp. He was in a group home, and the director at the end of the summer, Steve Norman, who was the trainer over at Rye Country Day, saw he was crying at the end of the summer. And he looked at the young man and said, "Why are you so upset? Didn't you have a good summer?" He said, "I had a wonderful summer, but I now have to go back to the group home." Steve became his guardian and have this young man live with him. And he is a college graduate doing very well. But I can talk about numerous stories of young people who have been successful. And I think a lot of it has to do with the impact camp and the camp environment, the people involved, have had to do with the success of these young people. That exposure that I had the good fortune to have when I was younger, these young people are having.
Yeah. And obviously, powering through COVID was not an easy time for many camps, right? As we all know, I'm sure for Focus for the Future as well. But I do think that the leadership teams at these camps have to have a newfound appreciation for what they do, the impact it has on all children, right? And appreciation for the business that they were in, when sometimes you're in this rat race of always busy and not having a chance to really appreciate what you're kind of running every year. You're taking it for granted in a way. So I'm sure, not necessarily a wake up call, but a moment of realization that what we do really matters above and beyond anything that we can verbally define, mixed with all the stuff that you're talking about, really does make camp a special place.
It does. And to your point, the following year with COVID, we went from 526 children to 28. 28, because most sleepaway camps were closed. All right. To your point, we have to remember, why do teachers volunteer to help children? During COVID, it was a very difficult time. And yet they're still trying to help the place children. Before COVID, teaching is tough. It's tough. Unless you've taught, you don't realize. Don't just say it's a 9 to 3 day. Some parents have difficulty just raising 2 children. Imagine having 25 children with you in that classroom, and you're doing this over an entire day. Not always easy, trust me. Okay. But yet we have 30 plus teachers volunteering their service because they get great pleasure out of it. And camp directors seeing a child grow up in their camp community, it has a great impact on them as human beings. As one camp owner told me when we first got him on board, and this was very interesting. He says, we can't take you because we usually fill up by September or October. But next September or October, we'll have an opening for you. I said, but if you fill up every year, well, how do you know you'll have an opening? He says, I'm making one. He says, camp has been very good to me financially. Very good. Another child's not going to change my life. You see, the money.
Yeah.
But if I can help an underserved child, that could still have an impact on my life. So these are some of the comments we've had the good fortune to hear about from camp directors, educators, and seeing some of these children grow.
No, I give you and the group that's working with you a lot of credit. I've seen it, and heard it through my own, father's connection to it and being a former player of yours. So kudos to the Focus for a Future organization, all the camps that have bought in and really supported what you've developed, and obviously for the kids to take the high road and really make the best of it. So, all those things have to click for it to be
Yeah.
a success.
Well,
Yeah,
I must add this, John.
please.
One very important individual that there's no way I can leave out. Going back to the coaching days, and of course the work we did with Focus for a Future is my wife Paula, because you talk about buying in. She became an integral part of what we were doing. I can't tell you how helpful she has been. Even my workshops at college, she would sit in the back of the room and she would go like this when she feels that I've spoken enough, the kids got it, end it.
Right.
And of course, with Focus for a Future, she does all the technology work. She's the one who puts together the website, sends out so many different things. And it allows me to bounce things off of her, and we share this. So Paula's been an integral part of any success that we've had with Focus for a Future.
And the common theme to the Coach K, both that's playing and coaching in the Final Four and the one on this podcast, is obviously having a strong person by your side. You see Coach Krzyzewski walking into every game holding his wife's hand. That's an image, having watched thousands of basketball games, I had never seen before. And that, I think, sets the right tone, how important it is to have, strong family, good relationships. And I do remember you always giving Paula credit and highlighting her as a big part of your team and support system and lifelong partner. So you've been consistent with that for a very long time. I give you credit.
Well, thank you. I've had the good fortune of going through my adult life with a very special person who frankly is loved by everybody. People who know Paula and myself, I think would totally agree with that. A very, very special, sweet, wonderful, intelligent individual. So yeah. Am I making my points? We got to let.
Yes. And if she's listening through the door, you're going to get a good pat on the back. So I think we're going to wrap up, but I think I do publicly want to thank you also for all of the life lessons that you taught me and others in preparing for this. Some that come to mind, other than obviously being a good person and focused and treating people the right way. Things like Mr. Fatigue. was a terminology I still to this day think about when I need to put a little extra effort in when I'm running on the treadmill or in Central Park or something. Not crossing my arms when speaking to somebody because it shows a lack of interest. I think I'm going to give you credit. I'm pretty sure you, and then all the stuff that you kind of jokingly did, but had played a significant role in focusing related to your love for the game. Simon Says, and I did do a little research that I don't know if you know this. Do you know the origin of Simon Says?
Do I?
The origin of
No,
Simon Says.
I don't.
Okay. According to the internet, for what it's worth, it says this game is centuries old and was originally called, pardon my Italian or Latin, Cicero dicit fac hoc, which is Latin for Cicero says do this. Back in the times of Rome, when revered statesman Marcus Tullius Cicero said to do something, you did it. So that is
The
the
origin.
internet def origin of Simon Says. Maybe we could end with your love for the game of Simon Says. What
God,
is where does
God.
that?
You're giving me the Latin. Paula still says you still speak Brooklynese and you're talking to me about Latin. I
No.
still put in Paula's name, Paula, I still make it ER. And in my daughter's name, or my last name, Kaminer, I make the ER and A, Kaminer and Paula. So you're telling me about Latin.
Yeah. Sorry. No, but Simon Says was a game that you instilled in many youth in America. And my memory is that it really taught you to listen and to focus, right? Two traits that are highly important in what everyone is doing today in their life with their family. Where did that, what's the history between your love of the game Simon Says?
Well, believe it or not, they're now playing it because I do it at camp over the years. They've played it in Japan, in Ireland, in Brazil. The counselors went back. So my claim to fame, Simon Says,
Yeah,
is being played in Tokyo. It's
yeah.
all right. It's
So it's a privilege to have had you today. I am going to end the broadcast, but let's actually end with on Focus for a Future. What are ways for those that aren't familiar with the organization on kind of in the next year or two, not even former players, people that would be watching this, how and where they could get involved with the organization?
all right. Listen, first of all, it doesn't have to be Focused for a Future. Last year, unfortunately, we bounced back from those 26 children to 332. But anybody who believes in supporting underserved children, and I'm going to just stay with the underserved children. There are many, many organizations that could use anybody's help, either as volunteers, certainly as donors, things of that sort. And a lot of people who don't know about the non-for-profit world, as I didn't until I got this started, you have over 1 million non-for-profits in the United States, probably a few 100,000 that deal with children of various types. And they're making a difference. And if people, especially as you get a little older, I'm going to be 80 years of age in June, and people of my peers and my age group, if they want to volunteer, I'm sure there are certain organizations would love to have them. If they want to make a donation in assisting children, there are numerous organizations they can look up. We still get phone calls because people look for scholarships for their children. So they look on the internet, camp scholarships, and boom, they see Focus for a Future. And so there are ways to be helpful
Got it.
to
Well,
underserved children.
that's a great final party message. So, Coach, thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll be able to do it again sooner than later. Um, we'll have to focus on some of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about today. And thank you so much.
John, you're a perfect example of what made coaching so beneficial to
Thank
see
you.
someone grow like you. So,
I
you know,
appreciate
the
it.
best to you and your family, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Bye. Stay on.
bye now.